program, the longest running public affairs program on WRFG. We are here, as always, working for some of the Friday Night Drama, Brother Lasquani in here with Kwekula Mumba. Brother Tutmos is on the way, and we have wonderful conversations and views and all kind of goodness for you all night long. So sit tight. We are here as always, and we are ready to take a trip to the motherland, to the continent. And this trip that we're going to take tonight is very important. So get your informational brain operating, the one that's taking in the information. Maybe even get you some pen and pad and take some notes, because this is one of those conversations that is going to help us find solutions to some of the ills that is going on with us worldwide as African people. So after this short break, we're going to come forward with a beautiful, beautiful conversation. So stay tuned.
I wanna trot to the African skies, the African sky, I wanna trot to the African Mars, the African mind, I wanna strive for the African mom, the African child, I wanna survive. Wow, me ready to go put on me Gideon boot, me ready to go educate all of the youth. Me tell them say Babylon system no good. Hail up last the eye and go slow. The ways of corruption we now fi choose. Africa the motherland we cannot lose. On the river Nile banks that's where we cruise. Sweet vegetables, all we dey eat like kings and queens. That's where we rule. Don't make no Babylon take it to food. Rise my people, don't give up your fight. Fire with the man, pagan can cool. Make Babylon know say them can refuse. Truth and rise, show me this thing. I come to sing for the African child. Hold up your hand and it will be over. I wanna try to the African skies, the African sky, I wanna try to the African mountains, the African sky, I wanna strive for the African mountains, the African.
Hi, this is Alice Lovelace coming to you on behalf of the Arts Exchange. With pride, we congratulate the past and current volunteers of WRFG 89.3 FM for 45 years of progressive radio and service to the community. 45 years of grassroots representation and a practice rooted in inclusion, participatory democracy, justice, and liberation. WRFG is a treasure to be protected and nourished. The Arts Exchange is proud to be a sponsor of the upcoming garden party celebrating WRFG for 45 years on the air. We encourage all listeners to join us at the Hammonds House Museum Saturday, June 23.
We'll come back with playing a little bit of Fela and then just fade it down and
Okay. Tickets are required to be purchased in advance at WRFG.org. And if I might add, birthday presents are welcome if you are not able to attend in person. The Arts Exchange looks forward to seeing WRFG's supporters at our 35th year celebrating Iban Newly with the Community Art and Justice Award. For more information, our website is www.artsexchange.org. That's www.artsexchange.org. Until then, we look forward to seeing you Saturday, June 23 at the WRFG 45th birthday celebration.
Let's get now into another on the ground.
That's appropriate.
Don't go to heavy the answer, you could say Ayakata.
I got this video when he was doing it live, and he was right there, he did that part, and when he said that, the people kind of said it, someone, he was like, come on, black man, African people, he was speaking like a white man. Ah, God. Saying good stuff like white man. Yeah, man.
Hello, yeah. Last year they played it in my class.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, welcome Black African family. This is What Good Is a Song, the Friday Night Drum. And this is your African World Report. For those of you who have been tuned in especially last week, we played our interview with Dr. Chebe from last year in the fall. And we were dealing with some of the issues that were going on in Cameroon at the time around independence in southern Cameroon and the history of that. Since then, of course, things have escalated to the point where there's no turning back. There's no other option except moving forward to independence, and we have Dr. Chebe back in the studio with us. Dr. Chebe Emmanuel is a Southern Cameroonian. He is an associate professor of economics and business. He is also the president of Hopeland Group. He is the coordinator of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonians in the southeast of the United States. We'd like to welcome Dr. Chebe Emmanuel to What Good Is a Song, the Friday Night Drum.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lumumba. I'm honored to be here to talk a little bit about what our people are what they are going through back in the homeland, and hopefully we can tell our story to the world, because now it seems like nobody cares. Nobody seems to see what is actually going on in the southern Cameroons. But I think hopefully from today, many people will now see and know what is going on, and hopefully some people will step in to see how they can solve this problem. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you for making yourself available for this and letting the family know what's going on in a more intimate way, as opposed to some of the corporate media who's just kind of filling into a narrative that does not suit our needs as African people. So I'm going to start this with a controversial catchword: terrorism. That's a word that's being used in relation to the struggle for self-determination in Southern Cameroon. It's being used in various media outlets, and it's being used, I feel, strategically, because if we look at the climate, the political climate in the world today, anytime something is deemed terrorism or people are deemed terrorists, then they're disregarded by the masses. They say, well, that's for governments to deal with and go ahead and remove them from society, and they're negative elements to our forward progress as human beings. And so, as you said, people are ignoring it or act like it's not going on. And I believe those who are deeming the self-determination movement as a terrorist or a terroristic thing understand that and hope that it has that kind of effect. But here on the Friday Night Drum, we understand that political move, and we want to provide the counter-narrative. So those in that struggle, within and outside of Cameroon, can you tell us a bit more about that struggle in particular, as something that is not a terroristic struggle, but something that is something much different?
Oh, thank you so much again. I want to use an example of something that I'm sure everyone will be able to relate with. And I want to use the example of Dr. King. You remember in the 60s when Dr. King was going around trying to make sure that some people, even like us, can be free today, can even come here and talk, can even go outside there and be looked as a human being. Many people demonized him. Many people called him all the type of names. But today we know the story. Today we know how Dr. King is regarded around the world. Mandela is another example. He was branded a terrorist, but we all know the story today. Now, the narrative by the government of La République du Cameroon is to brandish us, is to brandish Southern Cameroonians, who are also called Ambazonians, as terrorists. That is because they know if they are able to brand that name on you and it sticks, then there is very little you can do. But good for us, for opportunities like this, we are able to tell our story. No matter how much they shout over their voices, we are just people who are trying to live a life of dignity. We are just people who want to restore our independence. We are just people who want to be treated just like people, who want to be free, who want to actually actualize our independence that we had in 1961, that was voted by the United Nations in 1961 with resolution 1608. So we are not just manufacturing some things from thin air. It is something that has a legal backing. It is something that has a moral backing. So no matter how much they shout about terrorism, it will not stick. And again, if I might add this, nothing is going to stop us from restoring the independence of Southern Cameroons.
Thank you. Now, we talked about 1961. Most media outlets have only been dealing with this as long as they have been deeming this terrorism or rebellion or some kind of secessionist new movement. But you said 1961.
Absolutely.
That's not brand new. So can you give us a little, fill that gap in for us, for those who have just been tuning in, who have not been tuning into What Good Is This on the Friday Night Drum, who've just been tuning into major corporate outlets that are sponsored by some of these same people that sponsor the government of La Republic. Can you tell us a little bit about how 2018, this struggle now, we talk about Ambazonia, connects to 1961, and why is it, if it has the legal backing in the United Nations is really, really quiet right now?
I would take a little bit of a historical look. You see, those of you who have read a bit of history will know about the scramble of Africa. In 1884, the Western nations decided to get into Africa, divide the continents how they felt, divide the continent as much as they could walk, and they did that in an arbitrary manner. Now, Cameroon, with a K, used to be a German colony. From 1884 till when they were defeated in World War I. So in 1918, when the League of Nations, which is the body that preceded the United Nations, they decided that, okay, there were some victors in World War I, and as a reward, as a payment, they decided to take all the German colonies and divided it amongst themselves. Unfortunately, Cameroon was one of those German colonies. Now Cameroon was divided into two parts. The French took the majority part of Cameroon, and the British took the English part. Unfortunately, those of us who come from the British part of it, because we used to be called British Southern Cameroons. Now, the mandate on these nations were to take these German colonies, administer them, work with them, and lead them towards independence. So, which means the French had to take their own part of Cameroon and make sure they had independence. So, it was the same thing for the British. They successfully went through with that. The French, Cameroon, which is called Republic of Cameroon, they've had their independence in 1960. That's January 1st. And then the British Southern Cameroons had its independence in 1961. Unfortunately, when Southern Cameroons were having their independence, the so-called big nations of the world, for their own selfish interest, they decided it wasn't the will of the people of Southern Cameroons, it was decided by the UN Security Council. I say UN Security Council because the UN General Assembly actually voted that Southern Cameroon should be independent. But behind the scenes, the UN Security Council played a game. And they decided that instead of Cameroon being fully independent the way it should be, they will either be independent by joining Nigeria, or they will be independent by joining the French-speaking part of Cameroon. Now, reluctantly, our parents decided they were going to join with the French-speaking part of Cameroon. Unknowing to us, the French-speaking part of Cameroon had a very devilish plan from day one. And this plan was hatched not just by themselves, but from their masters, the French, to assimilate Southern Cameroons, to make sure they destroy every cultural bearing of the people of Southern Cameroons and just make them like one of their French puppets around the world. So, for over this period, from 1961 to date, there has been a systematic approach to eliminate everything that has to do with the Anglo-Saxon culture that we inherited from the British. Our people, being so peace-loving set of people, have tried to see how this problem can be solved amicably in a very peaceful way. I'm talking of 57 years. The more they try to see how it can be solved peacefully, the more brutal the government of La République du Cameroun becomes. But this is a different generation. Our generation is a different generation. Our people got up in 2016, October, still in a peaceful manner in a way, saying that instead for us to stay the way things are, they were asking for a federalist system of government, which is the government we agreed to start on day one when we came together. But they played games over the time and eliminated that, again, with the advice from their masters, the French. Talk of France, because the real individual behind the mask of all this problem in Southern Cameroons are the French. So they decided to eliminate that federalist system. And when our people started asking questions, let's go back to where we started. That is when the carnage started. That is when the killing, the burning of villages, the target killing, the imprisonment of people without trial actually started. And as you know, when you are pushed to the wall, you have to defend yourself. And that is exactly what the people of Southern Cameroons are doing now. But we have made a decision. Our decision is never to turn back. To have our free independence. To become free. To restore our independence. It doesn't matter what Mr. Biya and Lucifer might think. The people of Southern Cameroons have taken a stance, and nothing is going to change that.
Now you mentioned the ancestor Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yes.
And it's interesting to find common ground as an African who was born and raised in this country and connected with that liberation history and struggle in this country. That you mentioned 2016 as a move with a non-violent move.
Absolutely.
Toward going forward. And here in this country, Dr. King represented that non-violent move going forward with an intent of integration.
Yes.
So you mentioned non-violence toward a real federal system. Mm-hmm. And in parallel to the system or the history here, even Dr. King found that he was integrating into a burning house. And the next generation, as you mentioned, realizing that house was burning, decided we're going to take a different direction. And that direction moving forward, that's the legacy that we here at What Good Is a Song and Friday Night Drum are part of. That liberation struggle that does not look back. That recognizes there has to be an alternative to assimilation and destruction of our inherent values as human beings, as African people. And if it means self-determination, which it does, then we have to push that forward, even against seemingly insurmountable odds.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, going into that, that's why we're happy to have you here to discuss this, because Pan-Africanists need to be in touch with this. Because wherever we may be in the world, this is our struggle. This connects to our history. Whether we may have been born and raised in the United States, somewhere in the Caribbean, somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Asia, anywhere else in Africa. This connects. And before I really bring that point home and we discuss that, why it really touches the hearts, the hands, and the land of other places in Africa, we would like to listen to an audio clip from Al Jazeera from last year, from the December of last year, in which they talked to some of our brothers and sisters who are dealing with this crisis in southern Cameroon and just on the outside of the borders.
Okay, can we go back? Wow, really? That's what you're gonna do right now? Oh, Lord mercy. Come on. Come on.
So,
Alright, hey, Cliff, don't bring me back on wireless phone trips. I'm waiting for, oh my God, this say something else.
yes, family, we're having just a slight delay in the audio, so we want to make sure that you're staying tuned. And if you are just tuning in, perhaps you missed most of this conversation thus far. But we're talking with Dr. Chebe Emmanuel, who is the coordinator of Southern Cameroons and the Ambazonians in southeast of the United States. So stay tuned. We're having a great conversation, an enlightening conversation about what is going on right now in Cameroon and what has been going on for the past 57 years. So stay tuned and listen to this audio that will bring us into our next portion of our discussion.
And confused, Atimaku struggles to come to grips with their new reality. The refugee mother of 8 is also forced to take on the additional responsibility of looking after 2 other children, orphaned by the fighting in Anglophone southern Cameroon.
Their father was killed, their mother died of a heart attack a few days later, then my late sister's children. It was a struggle looking after my own, and now this.
More than 30,000 refugees now in southern Nigeria are being looked after by the Nigerian Refugee Agency and a few non-governmental organizations. But many here say they don't have much to eat, or anywhere suitable to live. Little also displaced by the violence, trapped for 3 days before reaching safety in Nigeria. She was 8 months pregnant.
I saw soldiers kill 2 young men for putting up a flag.
We'll come back. Maybe,
Most of the 500 displaced in this camp on the Old Hills overlooking Cameroon are women and children.
come back in,
So 150 kilometers
I know
away
you
from
want to
here
get,
is another camp, populated
in,
mainly by young men.
Haiti.
It's late evening in this makeshift camp close to the Nigerian Cameroon border. Thousands of refugees here access to food, accommodations, and the cooler are the thoughts on their minds as they go to bed.
The sun wants to jump in too, so
Tonight, hoping that tomorrow.
we'll deal with that next.
Yeah.
Sure.
The refugees say Cameroon security forces have even crossed into Nigerian territory looking for them. Cameroon alleges that the separatist Ambazonia movement is recruiting and arming these young men for attacks on its territory. Separatist leaders deny that, but say it won't be long before they fight back.
Self-determination cannot be effective without self-defense. We are opposed to violence. We are opposed to war. But if the Republic, if the UN should continue to dilly-dally as they are doing, and the Republic comes now to attack our people, they are forced, they are bound by the law of nature to defend themselves.
Yes, family, you were hearing a clip from an Al Jazeera report from December of 2017 in regard to the refugee crisis, which of course now has escalated beyond that it was that last year. But here having this conversation with Dr. Chebe in regard to that and talking about the Pan-African nature and concern of this issue. It's not just some Africans dealing with an issue on an island by themselves. It is a Pan-African issue. And this refugee crisis where you have Africans from Cameroon, from southern Cameroon, who are being affected by this, women and children, and men as well, but increasingly women and children who are leaving, being displaced both internally and into Nigeria and outside of Cameroon. Can you tell us a little bit about your efforts here in the diaspora and some impact, some insightful information from the ground in Cameroon?
Thank you so much, Mr. Lumumba. You make me a little bit emotional here. When you said anything that affects blacks anywhere in the world should be something that affects all blacks around the world. That's so true. We should not even limit it to blacks alone. If I will quote the Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka, he says, injustice to one person is injustice to everybody. And if we think by being silent in the midst of injustice, we are safe, we are soon going to see that injustice has no geographical boundary. Talking about the refugees, in fact, when Al Jazeera carried this information, that was last year, but the situation has degenerated. In fact, in Nigeria, as we talk, we have more than 60,000 Southern Cameroonians who are refugees, who are languishing in abject poverty. I'm talking of people who are living in bushes. I'm talking about people who don't know when their next meal is coming. And those are the ones that have been registered. Even within the homeland, within Southern Cameroon, the estimates are about 200,000 people have been displaced internally. So this is a humanitarian catastrophe. In our own little effort here in the southeast of the United States, we've been able to put a few things together, donations, and we are open to all good people to join us, to donate, so that we can send things to these people who are in dire need of help. These are not people who decided to move to a foreign country willingly. These are people who were chased out, who left without even anything. The same thing is happening even to people in the homeland. So if you are touched with this, we will be more than happy if you are able to donate to these people. If you want to contact us, you can go through WRFG FM 89.3, and they will actually know how to get to us. Your donations will be wonderfully received, and these people will forever be grateful to you.
Yes, thank you. And Brother Tutmos, I know you mentioned off the air that you had some things you wanted to input into the conversation.
Yes. And I was just sitting back, really just taking in what Dr. Emmanuel was saying, and just from the perspective that we look at things, particularly when it comes to the continent and that politics, and even with the quote from Dr. King, there's still that slight difference that which Dr. King, of course, fought against the white majority in the United States. But on the continent, we have that, what we call neocolonialism, that becomes an issue, particularly in regards to this. And as I was reading up on as we've been keeping up with the situation in Cameroon, and even including African Liberation Day, where it was mentioned, I'm hearing that there's some atrocities coming out of villages where the numbers are, getting up there. They're being committed by the security officers of the military of Cameroon. I'm talking about whole village destructions, particularly. I remember there were 2 Kwakwa and I think another Dadi. We're talking about whole village destruction activities going on there. So I wanted to include the scale of what it was that was happening, so that we can truly understand the situation there. That is not just another little conflict that's going on. So, do you have any idea? Because I don't want to misquote or anything, but has there been anything done on the numbers of dead,
or anything about the operational activity of the military in southern Cameroon at the present time?
Okay. I have two things there that I will talk. The first one you touched about was on neocolonialism. I will talk a little bit on that, and then I'll go to the carnage going on in southern Cameroon.
Yeah.
You see, somehow the colonial masters actually left Africa, but not living. So it was a tactical withdrawal to give a semblance like they left, but their roots were actually there. Because of the blessings that you find in Africa. So these nations did like they did withdraw, but they actually had a mechanism where they were still controlling African countries in all the ways so that they can still be able to reap and take the resources of these nations. Unfortunately, the case of southern Cameroon is a classic example. In fact, I will say this without fear of opposition, that the quagmire in which we find ourselves today, the problems we are finding ourselves today is because of the richness of southern Cameroon. Southern Cameroon has a lot of natural resources, crude oil, coffee, cocoa, and other resources. And that is why the French are doing everything possible to keep tapping and reaping these resources. I want to strongly believe that if we did not have these resources, this problem would have been resolved a long time ago. Now, talking about the carnage, I'm happy you named two places there. You talked about Kwakwa, you talked about Malende, but there are over 50 different villages that have been destroyed, that have been burnt down. I'm talking about total carnage by the military of the Republic of Cameroon. Now, this is not the precedent. They are doing it from a playbook. They did this to the Bamili case. That is another part of La Republique. They did that in the 60s. And that is how they were able to subdue that part of the country when they were trying to make sure the French actually leave Cameroon the way they should leave. And it worked. So they came with the same playbook in southern Cameroon. So burning villages has been their modus operandi. Killing and targeting leaders and killing them indiscriminately is their modus operandi. Their intention is, if we just kill, if we just destroy, if we burn villages, we are going to inflict fear in them, and with that we are going to be able to subdue them. So what if you see some of the videos that are coming out from the homeland, that are coming out from southern Cameroon, it's unbelievable.